The courtroom was packed, a dense tension hanging in the air. The heavy wooden panels bore witness to countless cases, but today felt different. Today was not about another trial, it was about reckoning. At the center of it all sat Judge Walter Grayson, a man whose influence had shaped the very walls around him. His reputation was one of power, cunning, and quiet corruption. He had built his legacy not on justice, but on control. And across from him, seated with composed certainty, was Senator JD Vance. Grayson had been on the bench for over 20 years, presiding over high-profile cases with an iron grip. He dismissed objections with a smirk, ruled with an air of invulnerability, and made it clear that in his courtroom, the law was what he said it was. He had crushed careers, bent verdicts, and silenced those who dared challenge his authority. But today, his own authority was about to crumble. JD Vance sat with his hands folded, dressed sharply in a tailored navy suit. His expression was unreadable, his presence unwavering. He was not here as a politician. He was here as the man who had spent months gathering evidence, waiting for this very moment. Judge Grayson leaned back in his chair, eyes scanning the room with mild disinterest. "Let's make this quick, Senator. I assume you have something relevant to say?" he drawled, already dismissive. Vance met his gaze, calm and unwavering. "Justice has waited long enough, Your Honor." Grayson chuckled, shaking his head. "Justice? You're wasting my time." But J.D. Vance was not deterred. He reached into his folder, pulling out a thick stack of papers. He laid them on the table, deliberately slow, letting the weight of the moment settle. "These are financial records, Your Honor. Wire transfers, real estate transactions, and unexplained assets, all of them traceable to cases you've presided over." His voice remained steady, but the implication landed like a hammer. Grayson's smirk wavered for the first time. "This is absurd. I will not entertain baseless accusations in my courtroom." "It's not baseless," Vance countered. "It's documented." The gallery, once murmuring, fell into complete silence. Even the court stenographer hesitated before resuming her typing. The attorneys at the defense table exchanged glances. Everyone knew Grayson played favorites, but no one had ever dared to confront him like this. Grayson exhaled, rubbing his temple as if bored. "Senator, let me remind you that you are not the judge here. You don't dictate what happens in my courtroom." J.D. Vance smiled, just slightly. "Actually, Your Honor, I think you'll find that today, you are no longer the judge either." The heavy double doors at the back of the courtroom creaked open. Two men in dark suits entered, moving with quiet authority. They were U.S. Marshals. Grayson didn't notice them at first. He was too focused on Vance, too absorbed in trying to maintain control of a room that was slipping from his grasp. But then he caught the shift in the air, the tension, the eyes that were no longer looking at him with deference, but anticipation. The taller of the two Marshals stepped forward, reaching into his jacket and pulling out a folder. His voice was steady, authoritative. "Judge Walter Grayson." Grayson finally turned. "Yes? You need to come with us." Silence. Heavy, suffocating silence. The jury members stiffened, unsure of what they were witnessing. The attorneys at the defense table looked frozen in place. The court clerk's fingers hovered above the keyboard, waiting for someone to tell her this wasn't real. Grayson blinked. Then he let out a short, incredulous laugh. "Excuse me?" The marshal didn't blink. "Judge Grayson, you are currently under investigation for judicial misconduct, bribery, and obstruction of justice. We have a warrant for your arrest." The smirk vanished. The color drained from Grayson's face so fast it was almost comical. His mouth opened slightly, then shut. He blinked again, as if waiting for someone, anyone, to tell him this was a mistake. But no one spoke. The entire courtroom watched in absolute stillness. Grayson scoffed, straightening his shoulders as if that would restore the power he once wielded. "This is outrageous. I am in the middle of a trial." The lead marshal didn't flinch. "Not anymore." Grayson's jaw clenched. His eyes darted to the bailiff. "Get these men out of my courtroom." The bailiff didn't move. For the first time, Grayson's confidence cracked. A beat passed. A long, painful beat where Grayson looked around, realizing that for once in his life, no one was coming to his aid. He turned back to the marshals, fury replacing his shock. "You have no right to do this," he hissed. "This is political. A hit job. I have connections." "That's enough," the marshal said, taking a step closer. "Turn around." Grayson exhaled sharply through his nose, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. He was still trying to maintain control, still trying to pretend he was untouchable. But he wasn't. JD Vance didn't move. He didn't need to. The weight of the moment was doing the work for him. Another tense silence stretched across the room. Then finally Grayson moved. Not fast, not aggressively, but enough. He straightened his back, exhaled sharply, and turned. The sound of metal clicking was deafening in the hushed courtroom. A hush fell over the spectators, thick with disbelief, even among those who had seen it coming. The attorneys, the journalists, the clerks. No one had ever imagined that the man who had ruled this courtroom for decades would leave it in handcuffs. Grayson's jaw tightened. His head stayed high, but it was no longer arrogance keeping it there. It was defiance. As the marshals guided him down the steps of the bench, his gavel slipped from the desk, hitting the floor with a dull, final thud. JD Vance watched as Grayson was led past him, past the gallery, past the courtroom he had once commanded. And as he reached the exit, Grayson turned, his eyes burning with hatred. "This isn't over." JD Vance met his gaze, his expression unchanging. "Justice has a way of catching up." And with that, the doors closed behind Walter Grayson, sealing the fate of a man who had once thought himself untouchable. In the end, no one, not even the most powerful, can outrun justice forever. As Vance turned back to the courtroom, the murmurs had begun. Reporters were already rushing out, eager to break the news. Attorneys whispered among themselves, some glancing his way with newfound respect. The weight of what had happened would ripple far beyond this room. But JD Vance wasn't done. This was just the beginning. There were others like Grayson, and he intended to ensure that every single one of them faced the same reckoning. He buttoned his jacket, took one last look at the empty judge's bench, and walked out of the courtroom, stepping into the light of a new era of justice.